Welcome to Red Flags, the podcast where we spot the green flags, wave the red ones, and occasionally get lost in the footnotes. I'm Yelena, your resident audiobook addict, and joining me is my co-host Sam, a true book reader extraordinaire.
Hey, how's it going, Yelena?
Yeah, very good.
Have you been reading anything interesting lately?
Yeah, I've actually been reading Lights Out, which has been very, very popular across Book Talk. You find it in every shop. You see that masked figure on a book and it is everywhere. So I finally decided to read it.
That's the book with the black and blue cover, right?
Yes.
With the skull thing in the middle?
Yep, it is. Very iconic now, I think. And it's a very good book, actually. I'm going to say, in quotation, a dark romance, because for anyone who's not read dark romances, there are some definite weird things that happen in that which shock people.
Okay.
And yeah, I liked it. So a good read for anyone who wants to pick it up.
Good to know.
What about you? You reading anything?
This time of year, honestly, not much. I'm in a bit of a reading, I wouldn't even call it a slump, maybe a lull. I'm not avoiding books, but my brain is so fried that I'm not really reading anything of substance. I get it. Might be picking up webtoons or comics or fan fiction or rereading books I've already read many times. Because it's just too close to the end of the year and I'm kind of crawling to the end, to be honest.
All right, well, shall we get into today's pick?
Yes,
we chose Strange Pictures by Uketsu, also translated by Jim Rion.
And I had never heard about Uketsu, this author, before a friend actually had recommended that we do his book for our podcast. But when I went into a bit of a deep dive on the internet about him, I found out that he had, or has, I should say, 1.87 million followers on YouTube. So he's by no means unknown. And he's become viral actually in Japan for, I mean, would you call them creepy, unsettling videos?
I think so. And you and I did watch some of them and we tried to. Unfortunately, I think a lot was lost in context because we don't know Japanese and there was no translations. But they were very much weird videos of like strange ideas that he's obviously thought about in his head. Like one of them was cutting asparagus and then it became fingers and there's strange music and high-pitched noises. And it's all done just in his house. And yeah, they were weird. I'm assuming they would be more creepy though if we had the context of what was being said.
Yeah, look, don't get me wrong. Watching the asparagus turn into tiny clay fingers was creepy enough for me.
Yeah.
But it is unusual. We don't actually know that much else about this person. And by we, I mean the collective we. I don't think anyone really knows anything about this person. He wears a papier-mâché mask that is kind of shaped like a traditional Japanese mask.
Yep.
And he wears an all-black skin-tight costume. And his identity is entirely anonymous. In fact, the only reason that we're able to refer to him as a he is because Jim Ryan, the translator, has confirmed that the publishing agents that Uketsu uses have referred to him as a he and have confirmed that he prefers to be identified with male pronouns.
Yeah. Do we know why he hides his identity?
Actually, yes. So Uketsu has only done one interview. I cannot find the original source. Again, this could be because it's Japanese and there's a link on his YouTube page, but I can't quite make a lot of sense of it. But I will link all the secondary sources that reference the interview later on in our show notes. But in that interview, Uketsu says that he used to be a supermarket shelver and that he was really self-conscious and a bit embarrassed at the idea that a friend or a colleague or a customer might look at him and go, oh, the person making creepy videos is also stocking the milk shelves. And that's a direct quote from him, by the way.
Yeah.
And so he decided to hide his identity.
It's working in his favor. He's now a published author.
Yeah.
We're reading and reviewing his books. So I think he's done very well for himself.
With all of the significance that we can offer him as two people in your bedroom writing or recording our second ever podcast episode.
Yeah. In Australia, it's made it all the way down under.
Well, he gave an interview to The Guardian on the 27th of January, 2025, or somehow The Guardian has quoted snippets potentially of that original Japanese interview. It's a bit unclear to me.
Yeah.
But he describes the mask that he wears as being modeled from something called a kuroko. And kurokos are stagehand in classical Japanese theater. And they wear all black, including a black veiled hat, and they often wear a mask as well. But because that traditional headpiece is so difficult to make, Uketsu has then instead opted for a paper mache mask instead. Strange Pictures, though, was released in 2022, and this book has gotten 4 out of 5 on Goodreads, 4.2 out of 5 on Amazon, 4 out of 5 for the performance, and 4.5, sorry, I may have gotten those two backwards. 4.5 out of 5 for performance and 4 out of 5 on story and Audible. And the book has been translated into 30 different languages and sold over 1.5 million copies, which goes to show that no one is really put off by that creepiness.
No. I will say, though, that the Audible reviews, there's only 2 on Audible so far.
Very small sample size.
Yes.
Got it.
But I guess let me talk about the book a little bit.
Yes,
and we'll get into the genre, because I think it might be a little bit confusing for people who just see the book and go, what is this actually? I personally would call it a psychological mystery, because it's a bit of interactive fiction. It's got a lot of logic puzzles that you can start, trying to work out yourself as you're reading the book. But it does hit a lot of horror and thriller notes, especially leading into the Uncanny Valley vibes. Because at first glance, when we read the book, things seem normal, but there's just something underneath it that just doesn't feel right. Something feels wrong. So rather than a jump scare of like your typical kind of horror, the horror comes more from the reality of the human psyche and what we're capable of.
So I'm really curious about this. I'd like to ask you a question, and not because I know the answer, but genuinely because I want it to be a prompt for conversation.
Yeah.
There's an author, his name is Mark Fisher. I have not read this book, but I've come across discourse about it a fair bit, especially in the course of researching this book. Now I'm really curious to read it myself. His book is called The Weird and the Eerie. And in that book, he distinguishes between weird, eerie, and uncanny. He says that while all three of them are kind of similar in terms of what they elicit out of a person, the feeling that they elicit, at the end of the day, uncanny is actually really different from the other two.
Yeah.
And he points to Sigmund Freud, I believe, and Sigmund Freud had coined the phrase, and I believe Freud is German, if I'm right. Hopefully I'm right. If I'm not, we'll find out.
Someone will correct.
Yes, someone will correct us. Freud's original word for this was unheimlich, maybe unheimlich, I'm not sure. And that kind of roughly translates in English to something called unhomely. And by that logic, what he's effectively arguing, Mark Fisher that is that the unheimlich starts with something that is familiar and then becomes strange from within and over time.
Yeah.
Whereas weird and eerie are strange from the outside, from the get-go.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you think this book is weird, strange, eerie, uncanny, all of the above, or some of the above?
I think it definitely leads more towards the uncanny. If it was the strange and weird, I'd probably go more on it's a supernatural kind of situation where stuff's happening on the outside. But this is all internal and all things that could be happening in real life. And because it's presented to us as like a blog post at the beginning, we're reading stories, we're seeing pictures, which is the main part of this book. We are looking at something and at first glance, normal, fine. Just a kid's picture or just a picture someone's drawn or blog post. But instead, once you analyze it a little bit more, because you'll get this weird feeling that something's not quite right, you delve deeper into it being
unsettling.
Yeah, so I think it does hit the Uncanny Valley vibes.
And it actually reminds me of Uketsu's interview. He says, and this is a direct quote, that everyone to some extent carries anxieties about the future, about daily life, and about relationships. He goes on to say that these fears often lack a clear form and they're felt on a subconscious level. And so horror stories allow people to confront and understand the unknown fears from within themselves. Well, normally at this point in the time, I would be asking you for a 2-second summary. But Jim Ryan, our translator, was already asked a similar question when he was interviewed. He's been interviewed a number of times by Japan Nakama, which is an online lifestyle and Japanese culture magazine. And he was asked to give a 3-word summary about the book.
Okay.
Eventually, all connects.
That's actually brilliant. I think that's great. I don't think I would have been able to do a better 2-sentence summary. And that's 3 words. That's brilliant.
Okay, so before we start talking about the book itself and we deep dive into some of its themes, the plot, the ideas, shall we do some trigger warnings?
We definitely should, because there's quite a few of them. And although if you started reading the beginning of this book, you might not think it gets into a lot of these things, it does. So if this doesn't suit any of you, if it's going to affect you, please do not continue listening. And that's why we have the warnings. So we deal with murder, death.
Yes.
There is violence, which in our views is quite graphic.
Yeah, for me at least. I felt very uncomfortable.
Yeah. There is child abuse, suicide, pregnancy, cancer, off-screen rape, stalking, animal cruelty, and that's just to name a few of them.
Yeah.
So it does get into some pretty dark topics for such a short book. So if any of these are triggering to you, or if you find they're triggering as you start listening, feel free to stop.
Yes.
Maybe listen to our previous episode or a future episode if it's out. And of course, as always, there is going to be spoilers from here on out. So if you don't want spoilers, read the book first.
Okay, so let's now dive into a plot summary, if you're okay with that, Yelena.
Yes.
Like our last book, this is also a series of interconnected, but unlike our last book, somewhat self-contained stories.
Yeah.
And importantly, each story has a specific visual puzzle. And as a reader, you're kind of encouraged to play junior detective and solve the mystery behind that visual puzzle as you pass through the text. The very first puzzle/story is a very, very short one. It's about a psychologist and a lecturer. Her name is Tomiko Hagio, and Dr. Hagio is speaking to a classroom full of students about little A. And little A, she goes on to explain, was arrested for murdering her mother at the age of 11. And the psychologist recalls having to analyze a drawing that little A had done in order to understand little A's mental state.
Yeah, and so this is the first drawing we see for the book, and it's a hand-drawn picture. It's a girl in a floral print dress. There's also a house with no door, a tree, and a little white bird that is inside the hollow of the tree. And in this sort of prologue, Dr. Hagio psychoanalyzes the drawing. Psychoanalyzes. I can't talk today. The drawing. And although at first glance the picture sort of shows representations of being of an aggressive nature, which is also seen in criminals, which when I read this and saw the picture, I was like, oh God, don't let me think this about someone else when I see their drawings. But she determines that little A has a strong chance for her rehabilitation because the picture expresses the desire to defend the weak. And if we gave her a chance to interact with animals or small children, we could foster that sort of kindness in her.
Yeah. And here, Dr. Hagio is really trying to distinguish between the thorny trees and the absence of any doors in the house, that sense of claustrophobia, against this very, very small, happy little bird that's sitting in the hollow of the tree and wants very much to believe in little A's desire to support and protect the weak effectively.
To nurture instead of it being an aggressive nature, it's a nurturing nature, a protective one.
Now, the next story is a little bit longer, actually significantly longer, and this would actually represent chapter 1 of the book. You are quite right, Yelena, that the first drawing is part of a prologue, really. Yeah. But this next story is about 2 friends at school. Sasaki is the older friend. He is in his final year and he's applying for jobs. And his friend is called Kurihara. Thank you. Kurihara. And Kurihara is a younger student at the school, and they're both discussing a strange blog series called Oh No, Not Raku. And that blog post is a series of journal entries by a man named Raku who is excited about his wife's pregnancy.
Raku is detailing his life, and his wife is pregnant, and you're going through all of the, ups and downs of pregnancy that happen, and he's expressing that all through this blog post. And his wife at the same time is drawing some pictures. This is where some of the pictures come into these stories, and it's depicting their unborn child growing up through different ages. Unfortunately, this blog post at the end takes a tragic turn where it is revealed that Yuki passes away during childbirth.
Yes.
And at this point, everything seems normal
although tragic.
until Raku does one final blog post and it just says, "I've finally figured out the secret of those 3 drawings." And so we've got then Sasaki and Kurihara who are investigating this, going, "What do you mean? Like, what are these 3 drawings?" And Kurihara realizes as he digs deeper, he notices these oddities that, the blog's timeline is a bit odd. There are deleted posts, and he deduces that there's a third person
that's referenced in the stories.
Yeah, that he suspects there's a third person living with them, and not that this third person's ever been spoken about in these blog posts. And eventually the guys figure out the meaning behind the pictures. They resize them, they superimpose them onto each other. And rather than it being pictures of the child at different ages, it creates a whole image, and it is Yuki giving birth. And she's being cut open.
With a cesarean birth,
effectively.
With
a cesarean birth, and a woman is taking away her
baby.
child.
And I think what's really quite harrowing is that Yuki, the way she's drawn in that image, is effectively dead on the hospital table while the baby is being pulled out from her. And it's quite interesting because at the time when I first read that chapter, I got the impression that Yuki must have had some kind of premonition that she was going to die, and therefore she had drawn her husband this series of images. And by themselves, those images seem innocuous, but put together as a whole, to your point, they represent a puzzle that these high school students then need to solve, right? So do you want to talk to me now about the 3rd story?
So the story follows Naomi and her 6-year-old son, Yuta. We learn that Yuta's father, Haruto, unfortunately died 3 years prior, leaving Naomi to grapple with the financial instability and grief and pressures of just raising a child on your own. And the drawing in this chapter is one of Yuta's that we focus on, and it's of an apartment complex. You've got Yuta and Naomi outside of it, standing happily outside. But up in like the window where their apartment would be is a big grayed out like smudge. And his teacher, Miho Haruoka, is a bit concerned about this.
It looks like it's been aggressively scribbled out.
And because it's a bit odd for him from what she's seen. And so she just, asks Naomi if there's anything that's been going on at home or if there's any trauma or just something that's been happening, even watching like aggressive cartoons or something, just to see and check in. But it's all left very ambiguous to what the reason could be for this reaction with the drawing.
Naomi gets very defensive, right?
Yeah, she does.
She doesn't like to be accused of creating a home where Yuta might feel unsafe.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a little bit weird when we find out that Naomi and Yuta are being stalked every night. And Yuta goes missing the next day, and Naomi refuses to call the police. And there is something there that we don't know about as to why she won't call the police. And you go, if you're being stalked, if your child's gone missing, why wouldn't you call any of that?
Correct.
Now, we do find out that Yuta is fine, and she finds him at a cemetery where he's actually looking for his mother's grave.
So his birth mother then?
Correct. So his birth mother, we find out, is Yuki from the previous chapter, which this blew my mind when I read this. I was like, are you kidding me? I thought these were all different stories.
And it was the first time you recognized that they were interconnected.
Yes, it was.
First time I did too.
It was, which is actually really good for the book. I was like, oh, you've hooked me even more. But then so we find out that Naomi is actually Yuta's grandmother, which makes sense. And we can assume from this that his father, Haruto, is actually Raku from the blogs. And then that would make Yuta the baby that was born in the first blog post. And as we end the chapter, it ends a bit in violence. So the stalker actually comes to their front door of the apartment complex. But Naomi seems prepared. She hides a knife. Axel, happy, lets the stalker in, and she stabs him.
Lastly is a story about a young man who is investigating the murder of his former art teacher, Mr. Miura, and he is investigating a hand-drawn image of the mountain that was found on Mr. Miura's body the night that he died. Now, the art teacher was murdered at the top of a mountain where we know it as Mount K, and his former student happens to be the young man who is investigating his death. And that former student, Shunsuke Iwata, starts to investigate this with the support of an older, more experienced journalist called Isamu Kumai. This story is really complicated.
It is, yeah.
It delves into some interesting explorations about how coroners determine time of death, how alibis are constructed but can also be deconstructed. I'm not even going to try to explain that in a lot of detail. Nevertheless, he investigates 3 suspects. The first suspect is Mr. Miura's best friend, Toyokawa. The second suspect is Mr. Miura's wife. The third suspect is a student, another former student of Mr. Miura. Her name is Yuki.
And this is where we get Yuki back in.
Correct.
At
correct.
a younger age at
Correct.
this point, yeah.
Yuki Kamado. Now, importantly, through all of this complicated analysis about time of death and how a drawing could have been drawn if a person's hand were tied behind their back, he deduces that the alibis of 2 of those individuals were solid, but that one alibi was falsified. And he suspects that the falsified alibi was of Yuki Kamado.
Yeah.
He then is a bit unsure of whether or not to provoke or bait effectively Yuki into coming to the mountain. He does interview her.
Yeah, so I will correct you. He doesn't think it's her at the time. They first think it's Toyokawa.
Oh, that's true.
And he goes to talk to Yuki. And it's when he does his own trek along the mountain to basically copy what his teacher had done. That's when he realizes what the picture means. And he's like, oh my God, it had to have been Yuki. It's the only way.
Correct. Except we later find out as a reader that Yuki is a red herring. Now, while he is at the mountain, he is also attacked in the same very gruesome way.
It is gruesome.
Very gruesome way that Mr. Miura is attacked. And we begin to deduce that it couldn't possibly be Toyokawa. It is a female body and a female voice. And we realize that it is not Yuki either because the voice does not match that Iwata had met. Correct. And ultimately, he dies realizing that the alibi was falsified. And he too redraws the same diagram that his art teacher had drawn at the top of the mountain. 20 years later, Isamu Kumai, who is the more experienced journalist, has deduced that, in fact, the murderer is Naomi Kono. Yeah. And that Naomi happens to have been Mr. Miura's wife. He baits her into attacking, which brings us full circle back to the end of the second story, where Naomi stabs Isamu Kumai when he bursts into her living room. The closing chapters are then a series of flashbacks about Naomi's upbringing. And I think quite relevantly, it's made quite apparent that she was treated really badly by her mother. Yeah. She was only shown love by her father, who passed away at a young age. Actually, I believe his father committed suicide.
He committed suicide, yeah.
And Naomi's mother, partly I think because of the grief and depression, but partly because she never had any strong positive maternal feelings towards her daughter, treated her particularly badly. She abused her a lot, physically and verbally. Yeah. And she tried to kill Naomi's bird. Yeah, Cheapy, a little bird.
Yeah.
And Naomi, only 11 years old at the time, snaps and murders her mother in an act of protection, I guess, to Cheapy the bird. And that takes us again full circle back to the very first story where the psychologist, Dr. Hagio, was explaining to her students about little A. And we learned that little A was, in fact, Naomi Kono.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was a lot of ground to cover. Again, in a book that ostensibly felt much shorter than I remember it. I want to talk now about your experience in consuming this book in audiobook format.
Yeah, and I would love to explain this because it became very interesting. So one, I'll say the narrator was amazing.
Yep. Deserve the 4.5 out of 5?
Yeah, I think so, because if you watch any anime, it's very much got anime dub vibes, which is maybe what it was supposed to go for. He definitely gives a different voice and character for all of the different characters that we've got. But he also does the women's voices, which this might be a little bit weird for people, but I think I'm so used to it from anime dubs where you've got a fatherly figure who's very feminine and they put this voice on as if they were like a mother. Yep. And it sounds exactly like that. I was like, I'm fine with this.
Yep.
You can be, what is it, like Oran High School Host Club, Harui's dad, who cross dresses. It's exactly like that. I was amazing. Like, this is perfectly fine. But a problem with it is, so of course, this is a visual book with pictures that you're supposed to see.
Yes.
Now, when you get the audio, you do get a PDF that has the pictures. And so I started with that and I was listening to it, and there's no cues as to when to look at a page on the PDF and what picture to go to next. So you have to kind of assume when you need to look at another picture, which isn't great. I thought maybe if they had like a little chiming sound or something to indicate when to go, that would be good. But also, from the very beginning, I got really confused because they're talking about pictures and I'm like, I don't see this picture.
Oh.
And because you purchased me the physical book, I went and grabbed it, opened it up and realized the PDF is wrong. So there's some missing pictures as well as some of them are out of order as well. So the PDF hasn't been set up properly, which you wouldn't know if you're only listening to the audio. So you have no reference that it's incorrect. So that is a little bit of a problem. And because it's supposed to be a visual book, if you sort of like stop looking at the picture, you go listen, you open your phone back up, the PDF resets itself and you got to go find the page. And so it's a little bit
annoying.
Yeah, it's a little bit annoying. We could definitely have improvements to make it better. It's never going to be as perfect as having the physical book because it is meant to be a visual thing. But yeah, so it was a bit of a hit or a miss with how the audio worked. Like I think the performance was great, but I would suggest maybe reading the book instead.
But this feels like a book that you could not consume without the pictures at all, right? So the fact that they have either misordered the pictures or didn't include some of the pictures, I think is a really glaring omission.
The issue is you don't know what you're missing.
Yeah, correct.
And I'm a special case where I did both at the same time because I wanted to know, and we were very curious to know, what is this going to be like? Is it going to be horrible for me and great for you? And while it wasn't bad if you didn't have the physical book, it definitely wasn't ideal. That's the main crux of what this book is.
Correct. And I really want to emphasize the point you mentioned about this being the main crux, because in doing some research for this book, what I learned was that Uketsu was inspired by, I guess, those psychoanalysis tests, your Rorschach tests. And he thought it would be interesting to pair that concept of a Rorschach test or a drawing test used to gauge the mental health of a patient with that of a thriller or a mystery. And quite importantly, he said that he would draw that scary or, eerie, unsettling, uncanny picture first, and then he created the story around it. And the question he would ask himself is, what kind of background would make this picture interesting? And that means that this book is art first, novel or story second, right? For me, then that meant that it was enjoyable, even if it was a little bit clunky or overwrought. I like the idea of a reader being encouraged to actively participate. It removes the passivity from a reading experience. I love the fact that, as you pointed out, at the end of each chapter, you continue to keep thinking about the mystery and you continue to keep considering if you've missed a particular component or an element of the picture that might become relevant later on. It keeps you engaged afterwards. And isn't that an important point of literature, to keep you thinking about it?
Because imagine all the books that you've read, you just go, I skipped all of that and don't remember what happened.
Correct. I want to come back to the concept that we mentioned earlier about this being art first, kind of story or novel second, because I think as a natural consequence of that is that to some extent we need to suspend some disbelief about the things that happen in the story and the level of, I guess, cognitive biases that the characters demonstrate and the leaps in judgment that they make. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you felt on that?
Yeah, so we have a lot of motivations from characters that are a struggle to understand. Some of it, I think, is cultural and some of it is the suspension of disbelief that we just need to accept. So, for example, one of them, so we've got Naomi as Toyokawa, who is her husband's best friend and was also a friend to her for a time. But once her husband dies or is murdered by her, which we found out, Toyokawa was actually planning on also killing him that same night and saw Naomi do it. And in consequence of that, he then threatens her with that information and essentially says, I will tell everyone unless you sleep with me. And so this goes on for a while. But then Toyokawa has to move for work.
And
then nothing ever comes of it after that. So, he could easily tell the police that Naomi did it, or Naomi could still be worrying about it. It just feels like a weird one that the plot point drops.
Yeah. Particularly because Haruto also witnesses them having sex at one point. And that too at a very young age. You must have been, 12, 13 or 14 at most. And again, there's no follow through. It's very similar to our first book that we introduced in our first podcast episode about this idea of a convenient plot point that then it becomes rather weak because it falls away.
And it could have pushed the story, I think, much further in a different way, which would have been cool. But also, we have the picture that's left on the mountain that we talk about in chapter 3. So her husband, as Naomi kills him, he draws a picture behind his back of the mountain, and they're doing a whole thing about time, and we won't explain that complicated situation.
Oh, this is the time of death. And the fact that Mr. Miura draws a diagram and that falsifies Naomi's alibi.
Yeah.
And he does that to protect Naomi.
Yeah. But so at the time, she doesn't know what the picture means. She doesn't have time to work out, why did he draw this picture as I was killing him? And is it to save her or to
incriminate her?
Incriminate her, yeah. And she just decides to leave it there. And if you are not sure what the picture means,
you take the picture.
You take the picture.
Correct.
Because it's only after she thinks about it, I think weeks later, she's put on the act of the grieving wife, that she goes, oh, he did that because he still loves me and loves his son. And if I went to jail, then our son wouldn't have anyone. And so it helps her in the end. But she wouldn't be able to know that at the time with all that adrenaline. You've just murdered someone. You got to clean up the scene.
And then it's even stranger that she would leave the diagram or the drawing on Iwata's body when Iwata is murdered in the exact same way by Naomi.
Yeah, I think the idea is it's supposed to be like, oh, well, if this helps me with the time of death thing again, and if they work it out, it's happened twice. And I think it's because she doesn't then think about, well, why would he do the exact same thing twice? And that it should mean something else. Again, it's a very loose plot point.
Very rubbery.
Yeah, unfortunately.
There are a couple of other robbery scenarios that I came across. One being at the end of the second story. This is the one between the two schoolboys.
Yeah.
After Sasaki has read the blog, he comes back to school with the aim to discuss it with Kurihara. And Kurihara is missing. Again, at the start when I read this, I thought this lent itself to this idea that something supernatural was happening.
Yes. I thought Kurihara was a ghost.
Correct.
I thought Kurihara suddenly died, or there was a big accident. I was like, what happened to Kurihara? My favorite name in the book is already gone.
And then, so we have Yuki having premonitions, Kurihara going missing.
Yeah.
But suddenly, and I think quite uncharacteristically, we are led to assume that Kurihara is one of the boys who bumps into Kumai at the hospital where he is recovering from Naomi stabbing him.
Yes.
And it's such a strange dialogue. And again, so much plot convenience there that he happened to be at the same hospital, in the same ward, at the same time, recognized Kumai, and then begins to talk about Naomi's crimes and the blog that Raku/Haruto had written.
There is also something that weirded me out is when both people got murdered up on the mountain the exact same way. It happens at night while they're asleep. And I just can't imagine that neither of them woke up while someone was tying them into their sleeping bags. Because I always thought maybe there was some drug that happened.
That's true.
Like something that would work, but that's never established. Because I'm like, she does work at a hospital, and I thought maybe there was something that she did to them. But none of that happens. And she's able to tie up these two men.
Like, these are grown adult men that Naomi stuffs into a sleeping bag, ties up.
They're in their sleeping bags already. I think the idea is that they're asleep and then she puts the rope around them. But you have to get the rope under them.
And how do they not wake up?
Exactly. So overall, the story seems like a bit of an afterthought to the art. So we should probably talk about what the art is as a medium itself for this book.
Well, I have spent a long time, too many hours actually, thinking through this problem. Because at first glance, ostensibly, the art seems to be a way that you can understand human behavior. And isn't that effectively what Uketsu himself says, right? And an example of that comes to my mind is Miss Haruoka, who is looking at the diagram that Yuta has drawn and then inferring from it that there must have been something traumatic that has happened in order for Yuta to be so withdrawn, draw something quite strange, refuse to get a new piece of paper to correct his drawing.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite think that that analysis alone was sufficient. Now, I mentioned at the start of the podcast that there was a friend of mine who had recommended this book in the first place and said, hey, it might be a good book to do at your podcast. She recommended this book because she was going to be reading it for her book club, and she thought it might be fun if we recorded a podcast about a book that her book club read and then, help us get views.
Yeah.
But when I spoke to her about it after she read it, she actually had disliked it quite significantly, primarily because of the points that we mentioned earlier, these enormous leaps that characters make as amateur detectives and the way in which they just jump to unrealistic conclusions that just aren't fitting in the context of a complex story.
Yeah.
And that got me wondering if maybe that was exactly the point.
Okay.
I wonder if Uketsu is trying to, critique the way we might want to use art as a way of understanding human behavior. And maybe what he's actually trying to say are human beings are more complex than just a simple single diagram can articulate, right?
Yeah.
And that if art is so subjective, then how could any one person look at a piece of art the same way and come to an objective conclusion, an objective, logical, fact-based conclusion about that person's or the artist's motivations or drivers, or in this case, guilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's particularly interesting because human beings in this book itself, the characters in this book, are themselves so multifaceted, and nobody can be effectively distilled down to just a diagram, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's relevant here is that in every single story, one of the characters misinterprets the diagram.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So let's start with story 1, the prologue, right? The psychologist, Dr. Hagio, misinterprets little A's drawing. She analyzes it incorrectly and then misrepresents her motivations as being one to protect the innocent and the weak, rather than one of having aggressive tendencies, a point that Dr. Hagio then reflects on at the end of the book when we find out that Naomi has now been arrested. In the second story, we know that Miss Haruoka herself has misinterpreted Yuta's drawing because she assumes incorrectly that Naomi has been abusing Yuta, and that is why Yuta has kind of colored out.
Smudged out
the apartment block. And we later find out that actually Naomi has done no such thing, and Naomi is incredibly loving towards Yuta. Arguably too loving towards Yuta, right? And if we look at the third story, again, we have an example of a misunderstanding. In Iwata, he incorrectly deciphers the time of death because he does not appreciate that Mr. Miura, the art teacher, may have had another motivation for drawing the diagram, and that maybe it wasn't being used to showcase someone's guilt, but rather shield them and protect them and create a false alibi for a loved one, right?
Yeah.
And again, if we come back to Haruto himself, he misunderstands the intention behind Yuki's diagrams in the first place and thinks that his wife is drawing the life of their child from young child through to adolescence through to old age. Ultimately, I think what we're trying to showcase here is that we can't categorize human behavior in reductive or simplistic terms when we, number one, have, to your point, unreliable narrators who have very biased and subjective perspectives over the world. And two, we have a single diagram that purports to explain all of their complexity and distill it into an image.
If this is what Uketsu is trying to do, I love it because this is something that's always irked me as an art student. You'd always have an exam where you get a picture and it's like, here's an art piece, tell me what it means. And there would always be a correct answer. And I never understood that because as an artist myself, sometimes I could be like, I put a single dot on a middle of a big page because I just wanted you to think about it. Like it had no meaning other than I wanted to annoy you or something.
To provoke a reaction.
Exactly. But there was always a right answer, which I always felt like was wrong, because how can you possibly know what the person was thinking unless they tell you what it is?
So, Yelena, were you scared when you read this book?
Well, I'm a horror fan, so I wasn't personally scared with this book because I love horror. But I can tell you for like the horror theme, I thought it gave very much the creepy pasta vibes. Now, do you know exactly what creepy pasta is?
I've come across the phrase on the internet. I do not know what it means.
Yeah, so I'll give an explanation for people who don't quite know what it is. But creepypasta is a term used to describe horror-related legends or images that have been copy and pasted around the internet. So examples of this are like the Slender Man legend or like the Backrooms, which now has a game based off of it. It's nothing that was ever originally real. And they're normally from a first-person perspective. So like, I found this weird tape, or I used to work at this place and this thing happened. And they're trying to sound like a real person with a true experience versus something from an author who's writing a novel, which is why this book gives off those vibes, because we're starting with a blog post.
Yeah.
And because creepypastas normally come with a lot of cursed imagery and videos, because this book is all about images that aren't quite right, it really fits that whole vibe and feels like it's the point of this book.
That's really interesting. It's very meta-literal in that sense.
Yeah.
Do you know, so why is it called creepy? Did you say creepypasta, right?
Creepypasta, yes. So we originally had like copy paste. So in the early days of the internet, back in those days, we would, a block of text would be copy and pasted repeatedly across different forums and chats, and that was called copypasta.
Oh.
So we had that. And so creepypasta is a merge of the two words where people started doing this for like scary stories instead of like jokes and spam. And so it became creepypasta.
Right. So creepypasta is effectively when a person posts about an event or a story or something that they saw, but they represent it as a true thing, a true phenomenon that happened to them.
But it's also the idea that it keeps copying and pasting around the internet, and that's how the legend builds, because you don't know where it started
and
from.
where it originated from.
Yeah. But I do have to ask you, did you find this scary since I didn't?
Oh, God, yeah. I'm an absolute wimp, right? So I found the premonitions that Yuki was having and the fact that Kurihara goes missing so troubling. And, coming back to our earlier concept of uncanny, I think the scene that I felt really unsettled me was, if you remember, Raku, in order to celebrate his first wedding anniversary, I think it is, with Yuki, he buys her a cake. And they share this cake together. Now, cakes are traditionally cut in 8 slices. And we know that Raku almost quite melodramatically complains in his blog post that Yuki made fun of him and scolded him for having 2 pieces. So if he's had 2 pieces and Yuki scolded him, we can assume that she probably had 1 piece. So we've got 8 slices in a cake. 2 were consumed by Raku. 1 was consumed by Yuki. That should leave us with 5 slices of cake left.
Yeah, correct.
But without any further explanation, what we learn when Raku is putting the cake back in the fridge, he describes putting back 4 pieces in the fridge. And that made me so creeped out. I was so confused about why there would only be 4 slices of cake, not 5 slices of cake.
Yeah.
And whether there was some kind of unfamiliar, otherworldly presence in this house that was consuming the rest of the food.
Poltergeist, demon.
Correct.
Could just be another person.
Correct.
You don't know what it is. And it is creepy, and it's kind of an interesting way to portray it through the story. I personally didn't find it scary. I was like, who ate my slice of cake?
So do you feel, and maybe this is a bad question to ask you since you didn't find the book, I guess, creepy in the first place or scary in the first place. Do you feel, though, that sense of otherworldly presence, that unfamiliar, unsettling presence carried through to the end of the book?
I don't think it did. So it starts off really strong at the beginning. And I do think it's because we get, the blog posts, we get all of the pictures, we get a lot of content given to us, and there's a lot of mystery solving. And then we start to get into more points of view from like actual characters, less pictures, and it's more about, as we learn that all of these chapters are interconnected, it's more about the mystery more than it being something creepy or mysterious, like I guess it is a mystery, it's mysterious, but like it's not so much about, is it like because it's a demon or something?
Yeah.
Is it supernatural?
There's no occult presence.
How did Yuki predict her future death? It's not to do with that. And the hidden stuff is more about, okay, how did this person die?
Yeah.
What weird thing is happening in the background. So I think it definitely has an arc, and then it comes back down and we step away from it.
Yeah. So we kind of go from something that could be supernatural and occult right through to human behavior and motivations.
Yeah, and I guess that can be scary in its own right. The idea that this actually isn't a supernatural thing, and that this is all to do with, this is something people can actually do. And it's scary that in reality, people can do bad things and horrible things to people. So maybe for some that
itself is
realness
horrifying.
of it is horrifying, right?
Yeah. With that in mind, when we think about what human beings are capable of doing, a question I have for you or for us to discuss: do you think Naomi is a cold-blooded killer, a psychopath, or a sociopath? Or is she just a victim of her circumstances? And I want to offer you a couple of points that the book presents to the contrary, right? That she isn't, in fact, a psychopath. I think it's important that Kumai, when he is in the hospital bed recovering from the stab wound that Naomi inflicted on him, he reflects that his mother would likely do the same thing in order to protect him as a child, right? And I think what's also interesting is the way the psychologist had initially interpreted Naomi's behavior as being one of protection and protective instinct. I'm, I guess, really reflecting and considering the comment that Yonizawa says at the end of this book. How do we prevent this from happening again? And I think that's in turn contingent on whether we see Naomi's big behavior as understandable and a natural consequence of the things that have happened to her, or whether we think that she is irrational, unpredictable, sociopathic, really.
I don't think that she's a complete sociopath. I think she's gone through a bunch of childhood trauma herself, which has led her to be like, I need to protect those that can't protect themselves, which leads to a lot of these arcs. And she definitely does have a point of remorse and guilt when she does kill Yuki, which I know we haven't stated happened here, but she is the cause of Yuki's death during childbirth. And she realizes that's a bit of a point for her, where every other time she's killed someone, it was to protect her son, to protect Chippy. It wasn't to gain something herself. It was to help someone else
who was in distress.
Whereas the Yuki one, she's gaining something herself because she wanted to be a mother again. So she feels guilt and remorse for that. So I think part of it is her unfortunate upbringing and the trauma she went through. And then I know something that you discussed with me earlier is maybe this is just a reflection on what it's like to be a mother.
Yeah. So Erin Brighton, who published a blog post in a blog called Crime Fiction Lover, and I will in fact link it in the show notes later. She offers that exact perspective, that this is a story neither about a deranged psychopath nor about a deeply damaged individual who has been subject to horrendous childhood trauma. In fact, she suggests that this is an exploration of motherhood and the lengths that women will go to in order to protect their children. And Jim, you might remember Jim Ryan is the translator of this book. He echoed a similar sentiment, and he said that he felt that the book was concerned with the theme of maternal instinct and the expectations that carries. But that makes me curious about the weight of expectations put on women and put on mothers. And I think we cannot ignore the cultural element to that. The fact is that this is a book set in Japan. So I want to ask you some questions about Japanese culture. Do you think that this book explores what it's like to be a woman in Japan and the expectations that are put on these women?
I do think it does. And I'll get into just some caveats first before we talk into this, because we are talking about a different culture. So we've done some research into culture for the 60s up into the 2000s, and some of it's going to be, we're going to touch on actual facts in history, but also we're going to delve into our own opinions and mine do stem from having a partial Japanese background. And I don't live in Japan, I never have, so I don't have that direct experience with the culture. But I can relate to a lot of things in this book. And I think it's important for us to talk about this because we've had friends who read this book who thought a lot of things in it were, that's a plot convenience.
Yeah, that were not realistic.
That wouldn't realistically happen. But for me, when I read it, I went, no, that sounds right from what I know of Japanese culture.
So then let's talk a little bit about some of these cultural norms.
Let's probably first go into beauty standards because this revolves around Naomi. She is in her 60s in the present tense of the book. She's described as a very beautiful woman, stunning features.
Yes.
But as she gets older and she becomes an older, quote unquote, mother to Yuta, it's clear that she's out aging compared to all the other mothers around. And so she puts a lot of effort into putting that full face of makeup on to make sure her hair's immaculate. And this is reinforced on the day that Yuta goes missing. And after everything and she finds him and she goes through all that stress, she comes home, looks at herself in the mirror and is just mortified she forgot to put her makeup on. And you think you've just found your son.
/ grandson.
Yeah, / grandson. And you're still worried about your looks, which brings us into a really interesting sort of shift and culture in the 2000s in Japan. So we sort of have two different categories you could fit into. Something called Yamato Nadeshiko, which is the ideal traditional look. As well as Gyaru, which was a rebellion counter look. And if you've ever known of like the Harajuku girls that have the tan skin, the very bleached hair and lots of heavy makeup.
So you kind of had timeless, effortless beauty on the one hand and a counterculture to that. Almost grunge look on the other.
Yeah, and so Naomi would have fallen into the first traditional category where it's the office ladies, I'm going to say, and you needed to look with pale skin, petite body, natural makeup, even though the natural makeup was probably so much more effort than normal makeup to make it look like you're natural, even though you're probably the most unnatural you've ever been.
It talks to the stigma that older women in Japan would, I assume, experience if they then don't fit into this traditional category when they don't conform to the expectations that society has put on them, on their appearance.
Yeah, part of me does wonder if in the reality of this, if you don't conform to that, would it stop you getting a job?
Well, I'm glad you talk about that because one of the parts of the story that I found really interesting is that it's set in a post-war Japan during a period that we call the Lost Decade.
Yeah.
And it's a period of economic stagnation in Japan. And that was, it seems to have been precipitated by an asset price bubble collapse. Look, I am not an economist.
Yep.
This is not my forte. Absolutely Wikipedia this. But the way in which it impacted young people in particular is, I think, quite telling for this book. It meant that young people were often in long-term unstable employment. They often had lower wages or reduced career prospects. But it also contributed to social consequences because they were delaying marriage to later and later in life. There was a decline in birth rates and there was a social withdrawal, especially amongst young men that were not successful compared to their peers.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about the impact of delayed marriage, about the expectations put on women to get married in the first place and the value of women that diminishes with age.
Yeah, okay.
So tell me if you disagree on this, but my understanding is that in Japan, women, especially single women, faced immense pressure, not only about their looks and the way they presented outwardly to society, but with the trajectory they followed their life in and the need to ensure that that trajectory included marriage and marriage at a relatively young age, regardless of their career success. I think you mentioned to me, because I hadn't heard of this phrase before, that there was a label, ake inu, or a loser dog, to describe unmarried and childless women over 30. And you've also told me before about some of the interesting analogies that Japanese culture makes to unmarried women. that in the 1980s and the 1990s, they would refer to a Christmas cake, i.e. a woman is like a Christmas cake. After the 25th, nobody wants this, i.e., well, after the age of 25, nobody wants a woman.
Yeah.
But I think that if we take this back to the book, becomes really important for us to understand Yuki's behavior and Naomi's behavior. So a common criticism that I've heard is that it's unrealistic that Yuki did not go to the police once she suspected that Naomi was plotting to kill her and therefore sent these coded images to Haruto. But if you think about the fact that women over the age of 30 were not considered marriageable, when you put that in the context of a country that is facing economic stagnation with, as it is, uncertain prospects, regardless of whether you're men or women.
Yeah.
And we know that Yuki does not have a close relationship with her family. It then is almost logical that she would not want to speak to anybody and threaten the stability that she has managed to so carefully construct for herself.
I think so. And because
Yuki is older than Haruto as well. She's 6 years older than him.
Yeah, but she also knows how much Haruto relies on his mother and is very much a mother's boy and will do what mother says. Is he going to believe Yuki even if she said, hey, I believe your mum's trying to kill me?
Correct.
You know? And she has nowhere to go. She's not working. She doesn't have the money. She doesn't have anything. And even if she went to the police about it, they're going to be like, there's no evidence about this. You're just accusing your mother-in-law of something bad, but there's nothing
to trace it back to her.
Yeah.
And even if they manage to trace it back to her, then what? Yeah. What does Yuki do? She has no husband. She has no family.
Yeah.
And she has no job, no money, in a time of economic uncertainty.
And also, she's in the middle of pregnancy. She's not getting a job during that either. I mean, that's just a known thing
in Japan.
But it's a known thing here.
Yeah,
like if you're pregnant, they're not going to hire you. They're not going to say they're not going to hire you. But
it's very difficult to get a job.
Yeah,
you're right. I also want to get your thoughts on suicide then and the cultural nuances associated with suicide.
Yeah.
Because that also, I think, is important to understanding Naomi's behavior.
Yeah, so this one was sort of like a big topic that hit me, which I don't think even you quite picked up on until I said it. But so I did a bit of a deep dive into how suicide was viewed in the 60s. And that's probably about when Naomi was a child.
And to recall, Naomi's father committed suicide.
Yes, from depression. And so it's around page 185 and 186. But she states that the port, and that made sense to me, which I know not for everyone
did not make sense to me at all.
I was like, yeah, that makes complete sense because it's seen as a very dishonorable thing. And then when I looked into suicides and how it's viewed in the 60s, there's actually two interesting factors. So there's something called an honorable suicide.
Oh, okay.
And there's a dishonorable suicide. So an honorable suicide, it's called inseki ji satsu. And the example is if a CEO failed his company or a student failed their family and they take their own lives, it's seen as like taking responsibility or an apology. It wasn't seen as like a mental illness. Instead, they're cleaning up their own mess or removing shame. But also in contrast, concept of clinical depression was not really a thing.
Yeah.
And because we were in a post-war economic boom where everyone was suffering, everyone was working long hours, and everyone was tired, the idea of committing suicide just due to sadness was actually seen as being very selfish because you're essentially saying, my pain is more important than my duty to my family or my country. So the person wasn't seen as like a victim of illness. They were just seen as being very weak-willed.
So in both scenarios, suicide is seen as a conscious act rather than, I think, maybe a desperate consequence of a prolonged period of mental unwell or mental illness.
Yeah.
But the question is, what is your motivation? Is it because you're taking responsibility for a mistake that you made and you're taking a moral action?
Yes.
Or is it because you're trying to get away from the responsibility that you hold to your family and to society?
Exactly. But for Naomi's case, her dad committed suicide because he was depressed, which means no one gave them any sympathy.
Yeah.
It would have been better that he got hit by a car.
Correct. And therefore they didn't get any support either. And she didn't get any reprieve from her mother. It was just her and her mum.
Yeah.
And I think a similar thing happens when her son, Haruto, also commits suicide.
Yes.
After Yuki dies.
Yeah.
Again, she is all alone. And the need to then be performative, the need to be seen, to be in control, conforming to society's expectations, and adding value is as important to her as everything else.
Yeah, I will say though, because we've now hit the sort of 2000s point when he commits suicide, the view is a little bit different because you do have Yuta's little friend, I think it's Miyu, and her father. They invite them over for barbecue. You know, they want to sort of like help out. So the view in society has changed a bit and they know it's quite sad what has happened.
So maybe just like in the form of art, it's impossible for us to just take anything that anyone does at face value.
Oh, of course.
I appreciate that these are fictional characters, but Naomi could as much be a slightly deranged / unhinged murderer, as well as a victim of the events that have happened to her and the society that she's been brought up in.
Yeah.
And compounded by the expectations that are placed on women and on mothers in society. So I think it's time for our penultimate segment of the evening, and that's our rating system. Hey, look, we have spoken about our criteria and how they're calculated at length, I think, in our first episode.
Yep, so we're not going to do that again.
No, we want to jump straight into it, and hopefully you can pick this up from context as a listener. Criteria number 1, plot strength. How strong, Yelena, did you feel like this story was? And how strong did you feel, or how cohesive did you feel like its plot was?
I gave it a 3 out of 5 because I enjoyed it. I thought it had some really interesting structure to it. It kept me engaged, and I definitely got a lot of the cultural nuances that maybe others didn't get, and which is why others didn't like it. So for me, it was a 3. But what about for you?
Look, I thought the first half was very compelling for me, and I think it hit the right uncanny vibes, creepypasta note. But I felt that there were too many cognitive leaps that I had to do in the second half.
Okay, yeah.
And I think there were too many, I guess, to conclusions that were made by our characters and too many plot conveniences. So I'd have to give it a 2.5.
Okay, so for our second voting point, we've got character design and development. So more about emotional impact, you know, were they lovable, defined, did they drive the plot, do we care what happens to them? What did you give?
Did I care what happened to them? Oh, not tremendously. I think Yuki was a very well fleshed out character. Naomi was a very well fleshed out character, especially, as you said above, about that cultural context that they are residing in.
Yeah.
I also felt a fair bit of sympathy for Yuta, although he was very clearly just there as a vehicle to drive the story along.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we had too much insight into any of the other characters, what they believed in or what they cared about, apart from what was needed to drive the plot forward.
Yeah.
So maybe a 2.
I agree with you on the Yuki and Naomi front. They were definitely the stronger characters, and everyone else was just kind of there. I gave it a 3, and it's not like I necessarily loved the characters or was like caring about what would happen to them. I was still more intrigued about the story, and I do think they drove the plot a bit. And I could also be suffering or benefiting from the audio because I'm getting sold each character through the audio person.
That makes sense. What about themes and tropes and plot devices? How are they used in the story? Are they used well?
So I gave this a 4 out of 5.
Great.
And I think my only drawback on this is I just don't think there were enough pictures. I think they fizzled out as we got towards the end of the book. There were definitely points where we would talk about pictures and drawings, and then we just didn't get a picture. And I sort of went, what a missed opportunity to put a picture in the picture book.
Yeah.
So we had some things sort of there with like the devices that were being used. But it was all enough to keep me engaged, keep me going. I was like, oh, wow, this is making me think at the end of this chapter. I have these questions. What am I going to solve? What's happening in the next one? Yeah. Oh, there's that surprise. And when I came out of it at the end of it too, I was like, I thought this was a great book.
I mean, ultimately, the mark of a good plot device is the extent to which they keep you as a reader engaged, intrigued that you feel as a consequence of it. Look, I thought it was solid. I gave it a solid 3. I didn't think that the the themes or the plot devices were used poorly.
Yep.
I also don't think that there was anything I thought was a standout.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd give it a solid 3.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. What about chemistry? And so we're talking about how do, the characters interact with each other and sort of the world around them.
And here's where I think I go back to my minor issues with character design. I didn't feel like any of the supporting characters were fleshed out enough to bear a lot of significance outside of what they offered to be able to immediately move the story forward. Yeah. And as a consequence, I can't rate this book particularly highly for how the characters interacted with each other.
Yeah.
Because that, I guess, is predicated on a degree of substance underpinning each of these characters. I'd give it a 2.5. It was fine.
Yeah,
it wasn't overwhelming or incredible.
I guess you're right. Like the engagement, I guess, of the characters together isn't fleshed out the best, but I did give it a 3. And again, I think this is maybe because of the audio performance, because he did such a good job at giving a different voice to each sort of character. And so I really
just gave them life.
Yeah, and so I enjoyed it. And because I know for you didn't really like Sasuke or Kurihara, which I was like, I love these guys. And I think it is just because the performance on them is good. And I wonder if I just read it, whether they'd still just be kind of boring characters.
Yeah. Whereas I just felt like Kurihara and Sasuke were two people having a conversation.
Yeah.
You could have replaced them with any other character having any other name. And the conversation would probably have gone exactly the same. So where does that leave us?
That averages it out to a 2.88. We'll round it to a 3 out of 5, which I think is pretty good. 3 out of 5 for the book isn't bad.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, right?
Like, we both enjoyed the book. So I think that's a good one. But
now, what about red flags, though? Again, homage to our podcast title. Was there anything that you felt as a bit ick?
So interestingly enough, not with this book. And I know I gave in the last one so many icks and red flags. And you would think there would be something in this one. But I think what Uketsu has done really well is even if it gave me the ick. So for example, the insinuated rape scene, it's all meant to be there because it is a horror novel and it is meant to give you the ick. So I can't say it's a red flag for this style of book.
That makes sense. Anything that made you uncomfortable was designed to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the only thing that could give me the ick is that I know the pictures were wrong in the PDF and it just wasn't formatted correctly. But did you have a ick or red flag?
I am very aligned with you on this one.
Okay.
I think a book that is designed to make you feel uncomfortable has succeeded if it makes you feel uncomfortable.
All right, Sam, so let's go to my favorite part of our show, our ultimate segment. I would like to present you with who I would cast in the movie if this was to become a movie. First up, we have Naomi, and as her older self, I think we should have Lucy Liu.
Oh, I'd agree.
Because stunning woman.
Literal
right
timeless
there.
beauty.
And she would work really well for just being like slightly older and just presenting that endless beauty.
That elegance. And it helps that she was also in Kill Bill, right? So I can imagine her being a murderer.
I mean, what? She, Charlie's Angels.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, that's it.
And if we did a younger version of Naomi that we had to, I would like to cast Arden Cho, who is from Teen Wolf or is the voice of Rumi in K-pop Demon Hunters.
Cool.
Now, I'm showing Sam a picture right here. She's 40 right now.
Really?
She is 40.
Oh my
She is a
God.
beautiful woman that doesn't age.
And I do want to preface here that in the perfect world, we would have picked Japanese actresses and actors.
Yes, I could have looked them up, but me just throwing out a random actor without actually knowing who they are feels a little bit bad.
It feels a little contrived,
I have
right?
tried to choose all Asian actors, though.
Correct.
So, like, if this was made in the West. So a Western version of the movie.
Correct. And so we had to kind of balance being contrived and artificial against being a bit stereotypical in picking Pan-Asian actresses and actors.
Exactly. So then we move on to the husband. So Yoshiharu Miura, so Naomi's husband, I would cast as John Cho. So you might know him as Harold Lee from Harold and Kumar.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going a bit back, but I think at like the age now he is going with Lucy Liu, they'd make a pretty good sort of like couple. I think he kind of gives a bit of like the artsy vibe of being like the artsy sort of teacher.
Yeah.
So I think that would work out quite well. And then if we move on to, and this is probably one of my favorite picks, Haruto Kono or Raku.
Yeah.
So Naomi's son and Yuta's father. So I'm going to say this right, K-Hugh Kwan, who is Short Round in Indiana Jones. He was a little kid in Indiana Jones, and he's so spunky. He has this real still child vibe to him.
Childlike energy.
And I think that would work really well for the character of Haruto. And then for Yuki, I wasn't really too sure. So we're talking about Yuta's mother. I chose Brenda Song, who is a Disney Channel star.
Okay.
And so she played London Tipton in The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and has done other things. But I just think she's a very beautiful woman and I think would just work well for being sort of like artistic, pretty lady in there. And I think bringing back someone from the old Disney days would be kind of cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. So for Yuta, which I found really hard to cast because I realized I don't know how to cast child actors. So his name is Forrest Wheeler.
Okay.
And if you've ever watched, it's called Fresh Off the Boat.
Oh yeah,
he plays
the boat.
Yeah, it was Emery Huang. And like again, he needs to be slightly younger for this, but I think he would be kind of a good fit.
Okay.
For it. It's just like a sort of like innocent young sort of like child and that. And then so Toyokawa, who is the best friend, I chose Daniel Dae Kim, who is Jin Soo Kwon in Lost.
He did well. He did well.
I think he works really well because he has a very strong vibe as like a person.
Carries a strong aura.
And
energy.
I think it would be a very good like contrast to Haruto as the best friend sort of scenario. And then also would be believable if he did actually follow through with killing him.
Yeah, yeah.
And also for someone who kind of like gives a vibe of like, okay, well, I'm also now going to manipulate. Not to say that he looks like a horrible person in any sense, but I think he gives that like stronger vibe where I think it's more believable as a character instead of him looking really soft. And then for our reporter, Isamu Kumai, so the journalist, I chose Stephen Huen, who is Glenn from The Walking Dead.
Oh,
if you ever watched that. I just think he's got like a cool sort of vibe and would be like kind of reportery. Then for Shunsuke Iwata as, I guess he's supposed to be like 18 or 19 or something. He's a young person. So I would choose Harry Shum Jr. Now, he is from Glee, if you remember him from Glee.
Oh,
he is
vaguely.
too old currently, but if we went back to Glee age, I think that would work kind of well as like just that like, I just want to help out kind of vibe. And I think that would work well. Now, that is my casting of actors for this film.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Red Flags review of Strange Pictures by Uketsu. If you've made it all the way to the end, then we cannot thank you enough for your support and we hope you loved it.
And if you've got a book you'd like us to tackle next or your own thoughts on Strange Pictures, drop us a comment wherever you want to. It can be on here, it can be on any of our socials, and we'd love to hear them.
Speaking of socials, you can find Red Flags wherever you listen to your podcasts and follow us on TikTok and on Instagram at Red Flags. That's READ as in red. See you next time.